This week on Thinking Biblically, we welcome back Avner Boskey from Israel to discuss October 7th, 1 year after. This week marks a year since October the 7th. Since then, the need to clarify the place of the Jewish people in God's plan has become an increased burden on my heart. This heinous act by Hamas terrorists upon Israel not only tortured, raped, murdered, and kidnapped Israelis and others, it unleashed not sympathy for the victims, but an unprecedented tsunami of Jew hatred worldwide. Too many supposed Bible-believing Christians have joined the Jew-hating mob, or, just as bad, have been silent, often in the name of a misguided form of fairness or something. Certainly, there are other issues to address, and I look forward to doing so. But to claim that the Bible is God's book while ignoring his heart's desire for the Jewish people is to ignore the Bible itself. So with that in mind, let's go to Israel. Avner Boskey is a Messianic Jewish teacher, writer, and musician who provides a biblically based and insightful view of God's heart for Israel and the Middle East. I first met Avner and his then soon-to-be wife, Rachel, in the late 1970s in Montreal, Canada, where we are both from. Sometime later, Avner and Rachel emigrated to Israel, eventually settling in Beersheba, where they are dedicated to stirring up the creative arts, worship, prayer, evangelism, and the prophetic within a Jewish and Israeli context. Avner has written several books, including Jews, Arabs in the Middle East, A Messianic Perspective, which I highly recommend as a primer to understand the complex dynamics of the current conflict. You can learn more about their ministry at davidstent.org. That's davidstent.org. Avner and Rachel have 4 sons, 3 daughters-in-law, and 6 grandchildren. Avner, thank you for making the time to do this.
It's wonderful to be here with you in Canada, even though my heart is in Israel.
And your body is in Israel as well. Let's make that clear.
It comes with the heart.
Well, as I've said before, folks, that when I do these with Avner, and over the past year we have had some very serious discussions. I have to be careful that he doesn't get me going with uncontrollable laughter. Avner's been a great friend all these years, and I love spending time with him. I'd love to see you again in person, but I'm so grateful that we've been able to do these things. You've been my most regular podcast guest in ever, and especially over the past year. And so you came on the podcast just a few days after the initial attack on October 7th. In fact, it was your newsletter on the morning of October 7th that I first heard about what would become the worst attack on our people, the Jewish people, since the Holocaust. It's so fitting that you'd be back to reflect over the past year, and perhaps we can get an idea of what to expect moving forward. So let me start by asking, did you think the situation would be where it is today, 1 year later?
My wife Rachel likes to say that in Israel we don't have post-traumatic stress syndrome, we have traumatic stress syndrome. In other words, for us, there is no closure yet on October 7th.
So say again, there's no...
Closure.
Okay.
We are still dealing with, like just 5 minutes ago, an hour ago, Hezbollah rockets from Lebanon killed 2 older people walking their dog in Kiryat Shmona. 3 or 4 minutes ago, there was about, 20 or 30 rockets landing on Sfat, the Hasidic city, and this morning there were rockets landing in Haifa and just north. A few rockets came from Gaza this morning as well. The people who still want to kill us are still very much around. Just a few days ago, we had, was it 81, 82 missiles sent from Iran, and cruise missiles sent from Yemen. We have people who still very much want to kill us. Even they say even paranoid people can have real enemies, and we have a lot of real enemies, and they are very committed, based on classical Islamic texts of jihad, to destroy us. They feel it's a shame to Islam that we should be conquering and winning in battle, that it exposes a weakness and a lack of spiritual vigor in Islam. And so for them, they're really committed to this. This is not something like America thinks you can throw some money at. So we still have these things that are we're dealing with, on top of which then how we respond to this trauma. So some political wannabes are trying to use that trauma in order to mobilize people to bring down the government. It's kind of like question time in Ottawa, but in the Middle East, you have people who are convinced that somebody is very, very guilty, and I'm sure a bunch of people are very, very guilty, but they know exactly who, and they want to basically string them up. So you've got that.
You mean they think they know who?
Yeah, they think they know.
They think they know who, but we don't.
They are sure they know who.
Okay, and that's why they want to bring the government down.
They want to bring the government down. They want to get rid of the people in charge. But actually, if you take away what the politicians are saying, and you look at how people are responding, I think for the first week, everybody was in total shock, because our supposed dikes, our barriers, our fences, our intelligence, our cyber abilities, all of them seem to have failed for various reasons, which is a long discussion. And something that we thought could have only happened, let's say, in Ukraine at the time of 1648 with Bogdan Khmelnytsky, is happening here, a pogrom in Israel. Leftist kibbutzim are being massacred by the very people they've been trying to serve in the Palestinian community for decades. And people were just shocked. There was horror because it was meant to terrify. The whole point of it was meant to terrify. One thing I would have to say, which might be helpful for people, goes back to a Hansel and Gretel and Hans Christian Andersen. There was a story about the trail of breadcrumbs that they left. And I'm not sure if like the geese ate up all the trails of breadcrumbs, but something's been going on in the Middle East that October 7th was not out of nowhere. And that is, you have superpowers attempting to be the main power in the Middle East. So years ago, it was Turkey. In recent times, then it was England. Then it's been America. Now China is trying to push in. At one time, Russia was hoping in the 50s and 60s and 70s to do that. But what happens with power politics is they say politics makes for strange bedfellows. And so if you're a strong country like America, you don't just want to deal with Israel. You want to deal with Israel and Iran. You want to deal with China and Saudi Arabia. But it's hard because these countries are opposed to each other. So one has to basically prostitute one's morality and ethics in order to do political manipulations. And this is what's been going on in the Middle East, unfortunately. And October 7th was Iran's communication to America and Israel that they were not going to allow Saudi Arabia and Israel to have a stronger role in the Middle East. It was very deliberate. They planned it. They strategized. They trained. They oversaw. And people often don't get that in the West. They think it just happened, and then the issue is, how is Israel responding to that? Well, again, if somebody's trying to kill you, it says, rise up and kill him first. That's a Hebrew expression. And this is kind of what we're doing here. So, yeah, I think that within a week or two, most Israelis, men, many of them were drafted, what we call Tzav Shmone, or the eighth call up number 8. And that means you're in the army as long as they need you. And so some people were not home for 8, 9, 10 months. Doesn't matter if you have kids, just married, not married, whatever. But the actual fighting spirit of the soldiers, and this is something that doesn't really get communicated in the news, the fighting spirit of the army is huge. There's no question to all the soldiers, this is a war of no alternative, and this is a war that we must win, and the people who are fighting are horrendously evil. And so that has been a good thing, and that changed the whole political spectrum here, whereas 40% of all Israelis before October 7th said, let's have a PLO state. There are people we can talk to. Hamas doesn't want to fight anymore. Within a day or two, it swung to over 83%, saying, forget it. These people are never going to live with us, and we have to fight, and we have to stop them, whatever it takes. So that's a big change, and that's still to this day what's going on in the country.
So it's kind of interesting when I was preparing my questions, possible questions to ask you, I had in there something that I had heard. I was going to ask you what you thought about it, and it's been October 7th for a whole year. And I thought, maybe that's not I don't know what he's going to do with that. And when you started off, that seemed to be the kind of thing that you were saying. Is it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Back in 9/11, some of us still remember that. There was a cartoon in a journal saying, Israel, every day is 9/11. And what that means is that every day we're dealing with people who really are trying to kill us. It's very rare that someone, let's say, will try to kill you for a parking space in Ottawa, or that somebody in Calgary will pull out a knife and stab you if you're standing in line for fried chicken. But in Israel, there are people trying to kill us every day, all the time. And it's not a question of, do you feel that or don't feel that? We see it in the news. These are our friends. These are our relatives. And it's happening all the time, all the time. So, yeah, it's it's interesting. Let me tell you a very short story. One time I went into the Snowden Deli in Montreal, which is a place that both you and I think, do pilgrimages every time we go to Montreal. And there were a bunch of younger people in their 20s, Jewish kids, who were probably waiting to go in, waiting to go out. And I was looking at their faces and I said, they don't look like Israeli kids, but they're Jewish. What's the difference? And I was studying them and I realized the muscles on their faces were not tense. They're living in a society where everything is hunky-dory. It's just wonderful. But in Israel, kids grow up with terrorism, with rockets. They know they're going to go into the army, 3 years, and they know there's people who want to kill them, their parents, and their grandparents. So it changes. It gives you a tougher type of individual. Same genetic code, same Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but a different perspective. And this is one of the differences.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm hearing that pre-October 7th to post-October 7th, things are the same but different. And especially if I heard you correctly, you were saying that many people thought the status quo was acceptable. Post-October 7th, not anymore.
Tell you another story. One of my sons lives just outside of Jerusalem, and there happens to be a shawarma or gyros or whatever you call it, doner kebab place. And I was going with my wife there, sitting, waiting. We ordered something to eat, and up walks to this little fast food place the former head of the Israeli FBI. And I recognized his name, and he had been in a movie that I had seen recently, and I walked over to him and said, hey, I'm normal. Can I ask you some questions, 2 questions? And he said, sure. I said, I saw you in a movie with many other leaders of Israeli intelligence, and you were all pro Yasser Arafat. Why is that? How come somebody who's in charge of the Mossad or the Shabak ends up pro-Arafat. And he said, well, because we really understand them. I said, okay. I said, you were in a movie and you said these things, but it seemed to me that you didn't really factor in the aspect of jihadi belief on the part of our enemies as a really important issue in war and in their commitment to destroying us. It seems that because you're secular, you kind of dismiss that. And he said, yeah, that could very well be. That's a real problem here. We're fighting people who are highly committed to what Muhammad was committed to, which was covering the world with green paint, like Sherwin-Williams, taking it all and making it all Islamic. And if you don't agree, you have three choices. Either you accept it, or you're put to death, or you become second-class citizen. And if you're secular, you say, that's just nonsense. It's not important, but it's hugely important.
So you're saying that Israelis post October 7th get that better than they did before?
A little more.
So continuing the color, a metaphor, on October 7th, Hamas showed their colors.
Yeah, I was reading a book just a month ago that I wrote, and I was quoting from somebody else, and he was describing the 1648 pogroms of Khmelnytsky. And I'm looking at this, I'm saying that's exactly what happened October 7th, literally word for word. So it's not the first time it's happened to the Jews, but these are not Ukrainian Catholics or Orthodox who are doing this. These are Islamists who are doing this. And most of us in Israel don't know anything about it. We're really raised with no understanding of what the Quran teaches. And I would say, if you go to Canada or America, how many people really understand Islam's end of days view, their view of the Dajjal, their Antichrist, their hatred for the Jewish people based on what Muhammad said and what the Hadith says? I mean, this is kosher Islam. And, for some people that say we can't talk about it because it's maybe some people are going to get upset. That's what it is. So one can have an ostrich mentality, which is what the Western world does. But in the Islamic world, that's not the way they see it.
Yeah, so we've been seeing the same thing on our streets since October 7th, and the campus encampments, the so-called pro-Palestine, I call them so-called pro-Palestinian protests because I don't really think they're for the Palestinian peoples. It's rather they're for an ideology, the kind that you are referring to. And I guess a lot of people don't understand how so many Israelis thought the status quo was acceptable, that most people are like us. Yeah, there's some radicals out there, but we can contain them and this sort of thing. But October 7th has just totally changed.
I think it was Vladimir Lenin who used the term useful idiots. And it's not an insult, it's a description. So it's not meant to be like, hey,
I'll remember to say that to people. I'm not insulting you, it's just a description.
Right. Yeah. But what he meant is there are people who don't really understand where socialism and communism were going, but they were useful because they were social democrats in opening the door for the communist revolution to come in. These people who are, if you're talking about free Palestine, you would have to say from Hamas. If you're talking about, something being pro-Palestinian, then getting rid of those who are torturing and killing and enslaving their own people, that would be a step in the right direction. But these people really do not understand what's going on in the Islamic world and in Gaza. Not at all.
It's now I'm sure it's not identical, but it's striking to me that so many Israelis thought it was kind of again that it was okay. We can handle this. They're not all bad. Of course, and the people that lived in the kibbutzim near Gaza, thinking that they could build bridges and be friends. That view of the basic goodness of humanity and that sort of thing. Um, yeah.
And you know, the fact is, it's not everybody on the Palestinian side who feels that way. In latest polls, it's only 83% who feel that way. So
It,
I think it's important to understand that we think here that everybody just wants to have a good time, you know, like the Beatles said in their song, you know, oh yeah. It's not the case. They really support this. It reminds me of running into people when I lived in Russia for a while who said, we need Stalin again. We need somebody really strong. And I said, do you know that 50 million people died under his tutelage? And they said, oh no, that's all lies, which is what my parents said to me too. People who are raised with a socialist leaning, social democratic background assume that the whole world has imbibed the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights and the American Constitution. Not at all, and certainly not in the Middle East. And I think the suggestion for Israel to treat Hamas as if they are Speaker's Corner at Hyde Park is criminal. And unfortunately, we're getting a lot of criminal advice from top leaders of countries whose names I forget right at this point.
Yeah. So one of the things that's been difficult for us, and I imagine even more difficult for you, or you just ignore it, is the constant equivocating, if that's the right word. People go to pray for us, in more maybe in a personal kind of situation. They're praying for us and our people. They're praying for peace, for an end to the conflict. They, especially with being the anniversary of October 7th, that, for the grief, for the trauma, or pray for the hostages. And they have to always add the innocent Palestinians. And it's very, and you already alluded to that. And sometimes it's just plain gross. We had actually wonderful memorial rally on Parliament Hill. I live here in the capital of Canada, as you know, but for our people watching, so I'm in Ottawa, Canada. And on Sunday afternoon, there was a march from our city hall to our center of federal government, Parliament Hill. It was a grassroots rally by members of the Jewish community, and it was actually it was a beautiful time. And one of our friends ended up getting interviewed, and a little bit of her interview got on the news on CTV, one of our main networks here in Canada. And so they did, it was okay. They showed the march, they showed some of the speeches, all that they could do with these little sound bites. And then they had to talk about all the people who've been killed in Gaza over all this and all the rest. And you saw the day before, now they're showing the larger Palestinian rally from, as I said, this day before, which was Saturday. And it's this constant, yeah, okay, we'll give you some moments, but let's remember this other side. One of my daughters on October 7th shared with our family, and then I put it on Facebook with her permission. And it was, can't you give us one day? Can't you give us even one day to grieve without? So can you speak into that?
I think you and I saw this a year ago, actually. We thought with this huge, savage raping, kidnapping, torturing, kids in front of their parents in front of their kids, that certainly the world would realize what we're going through. Within one day, organized anti-Semitic protests broke out all over the world, accusing Israel of genocide. This is before any bombings, before any responses. Just our existence is genocide. And I think one of the things, and I'm talking specifically to those who believe the Bible, okay? Because if you don't believe the Bible, it's a different perspective. But I think when we think about the fact that God said in Ezekiel 37 and Ezekiel 39, other places, many other places, that he was going to bring the Jewish people back to their land and not leave any behind, which is the last few verses of Ezekiel 39, we say, oh, that's a wonderful scripture. But have you ever considered what that means? It means coming to the Middle East and coming back to the land God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, there's a lot of people here who have squatted on our land and seized it and said it's theirs in the name of jihad. They didn't get here by themselves. They came in the name of jihad. And we in the West say that's undoable. And God says, I've got another thing coming for you, Bobby. I'm bringing the Jewish people back to their land. And there's going to be people trying to kill them. And I'll write about it in the prophets. Many of us just don't want to think about that. But this is exactly what God orchestrated to show his power. And that's, by the way, where Ezekiel 38, 9 through 11 comes in, where God says, I'm bringing the Jewish people back by my Spirit, but without the Spirit. And then I'm going to breathe on them, and they're going to, dry bones are going to stand up, and they're going to turn into a mighty army, much, much. Verses 9 through 11 of Ezekiel 37. Most of us would like to give away the God of Joshua. We really have difficulty with the God of Joshua. We say, oh, that can't be in the Bible. Why didn't Joshua serve tea to the Canaanites? And we actually want Israel to ask forgiveness for removing the Canaanites. That's where we are, most Christians in the Christian world. This shows how far we've drifted from Exodus 15, verse 3, where it says Yahweh is a warrior. We don't understand that. We don't want that. We want the United Nations, and that's what we'll get.
Yeah, but Avner, we know about the progression in Scripture, that God was like that when he was quite ornery for quite a time. And then when Yeshua, Jesus, came, what he did was not only bring forgiveness to us, but he made God nice.
And you know, this is a heresy from 140 AD within the history of the Christian church. It's called Marcionism. Marcion was a lawyer from Syncope.
Did people call him Marcy for short?
No. Oh. I have some friends with that name.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
but,
grew up with them.
But Marcion basically said there is a demiurge, a sub-god known as Yahweh. He's vengeful and hateful, very focuses on legal justice and on punishment. He wrote the Old Testament, and he's bad. But the God who came to us through Jesus, he is good. So we need to get rid of everything Jewish from the Bible, which means you got to get rid of 95% of the Bible. Then you got a canon called the Marcionite canon, a very slim volume. And basically he said, get rid of everything Jewish. God has moved on from the Jews to the Gentiles who he likes more. That's what Justin Martyr, the Samaritan, said. And so what we have is actually theological anti-Semitism, which curses the Bible in the name of progress.
Yeah, but you're talking about an ancient heresy. We moved on from that.
No, this is exactly the same thing we're dealing with today. Because people who say, you know, the Jewish people don't understand God, they don't turn the other cheek. Joshua didn't turn the other cheek. It's in the Bible. So we have to choose whether we're going to follow the Bible perspective or we're going to follow some kind of pietistic, pacifistic, neo-Marxist synthesis. And that's kind of what we're doing.
Wow, you did that right out of your head. I don't think you were reading that. That was very impressive.
No, I actually saw it reflected in your glasses.
Yeah. So one of the things that happened when I first interviewed you on October the 10th, I think it was, of 2023 to talk about all this, I would lobball you certain questions or make it sound as if to me, it was obvious, like even right now, like I'm very aware that Marcionism has still infected much of the Christian church, that basically many people who claim to be following the Jewish Messiah believe the entire scripture are actually practical Marcionists. But the way I asked that question was to get you to give the answer. I'm running commentary now, folks. So I did that several times a year ago. And there are some people that actually thought that they were, more kind of genuine questions. And I was really, really clued out. And people got mad at me for either being stupid.
There's a famous British writer, Samuel Butler, who said that devils disguise themselves so often these days as angels that it's considered dangerous to be found in the presence of angels.
Okay. How does that relate to what we're talking about?
Saying when you raise questions like this, people assume that you must also be a heretic.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, my heart has been so heavy about this particular issue, about how things like Marcionism and things that we call replacement theology, supersessionism, has so uh, infected otherwise well-meaning, attempting at being Bible-believing, quote unquote Christians. It's horrible, and it's actually don't realize how much it's undermining their own understanding of Scripture and their own relationship to God, and then from there it affects their lives. I have a
Yeah,
message
actually,
there's a message I've been working on, which I might do next week. That might be my last message ever, on the topic of Christian anti-Semitism and how serious it is. And we'll wait and see about
95%,
that. Pray for me, people who pray for me.
95% of all Christians today are replacement theology.
Yeah, but
I
they
was
think,
just,
but they're proud of it. They
they
think that's
don't
the
know
right
it.
interpretation of
They
Scripture.
do because God just got so, what's the correct word? He got so ticked off with the Jews, that he said, okay, now it's not Israel, now it's just a remnant of Israel, and they screwed up. So now it's the Gentiles. I like them more. And that's basically where the church is today. And they don't understand that the God they worship says, I've got a Jewish star on my chest. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Yeshua, Jesus says, I'm the Messiah from the house of David, which happens to be a bunch of Jews. And people are going to get a shock when Yeshua returns. It's like, what? There's no other Messiah, just this Jewish fellow. Yeah, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. This is kind of a bit of a risky question, perhaps. It's sort of I think it's among Christians in particular. It might be an elephant in the room, and that is the Nova Festival, and it might have been one of the reasons why they attacked on that day. Maybe you know more about this, but I think they took advantage of that festival there. So there are a lot of us that may not approve of some of the goings on that happen in a rave party like that. And there might even be people out there that think, oh, this was an act of God's judgment upon those young people. How do you respond to something like that?
As I was trained in pastoral counseling, and we were dealing with people who've been raped, one of the things they say is do not justify the rapist. The rapist is an evil person. And some people who maybe are struggling with their own pornographic desires say, oh, the woman deserved it because her dress was half an inch above her knee. And this is actually gaslighting. It is blaming the victim. Now, if you ask a separate question, which is, are rave goers in Canada all deserving of being murdered and raped? The answer probably might be, on that basis, sure. But I wouldn't come to you for counseling if that's the counseling you're going to give. And I wouldn't advise a woman who's been raped to go to a counselor who's going to blame her for what happened. So I think there are those who use this argument to justify Hamas murder, in which case they are accomplices. Now, if one wants to say, was it wise, helpful, good for them to do that? I would say, start in Jerusalem and go over the whole world, because this type of thing is happening everywhere. I once smoked marijuana in Snowdon with a very famous rabbi who danced around with a Buddha statue in his hands. Okay, according to Deuteronomy, he deserved death, I deserve death. The Lord had mercy on me. Who do we want to represent here? And what does it mean in Isaiah 40? It says, Dabru alev Yerushalayim, speak over the heart of Jerusalem. I had a teacher tell me, when you wash people's feet, make sure the water isn't boiling hot. And I would say in this case, the water is pretty hot when people say that. And I'm not justifying idolatry, and I'm not justifying adultery or fornication or drug use or occult. I think those are all bad things. And I was involved in many of those things before I came to faith, and thank the Lord, He had mercy on me, and I can speak about these things clearly.
I was thinking of the interaction that some had with Yeshua in the Gospel of Luke when they talked about the people that Pilate mixed their blood, and were they worse sinners than others because this happened to them. And Yeshua rightfully turns the tables on them and says, don't think that they are any worse sinners than anyone else. You are going to experience similar judgment if you do not repent. And I'm going somewhere with this. So any folks that are going to point at the so-called, not so-called, because we've all fallen short of God's standards, right? So the people at the Nova Festival falling short, they were sinners. And if we're going to point fingers at them that they got what they deserved, that's coming after you, and it's coming after me. So we got to be really, really careful. And then going back to the earlier question, Marcionism, Christian anti-Semitism, replacement theology, this idea that because we Jewish people have somehow failed in a particular way, more probably according to your out there, you guys' standard, not the biblical one, but people will look at us as how we failed, and so we have been completely disqualified from being objects of God's love, mercy, and grace. If that's true, you're all in trouble, folks.
That's Deuteronomy. That's Deuteronomy 20.
There's a guy years ago. I was leading worship at these series of tent meetings not far from here before we moved to the Ottawa area. And the original speaker, he couldn't make it, so they brought out this other guy from Israel. And this other guy came and he said, and I quote him from time to time, about how God relates to us. And he says, and he was talking about the Jewish people in particular, and then applying it to all people. And it was not for who we are, not because of what we've done, but because of his great faithfulness. Would you happen to know who that person was, Avner?
That's me, actually.
What's you, actually? And obviously, I've never forgotten it. That was 1996.
That's right.
Yep.
Deuteronomy 28, verse 1 through 14 says, if the Jewish people are Boy Scouts and do what's good, here are all the blessings that come to them. And then from 15 to 68, it says, and if you don't do what's good, here's all the curses that have come to you. It says in Romans 16 and another 1:16 and other places that the Jewish people, because we're the firstborn son, we get the double blessing and the double judgment. And so I would ask Gentiles, listen, if you are pointing the finger at Israel, it says if you curse or look down on Israel, you're going to get cursed. Which curse would you like? Or maybe you just like to trade places with us so you can get blessed or judged twice as much. And the answer is, in most cases, people are not thinking biblically. They're just pointing the finger. And interestingly, in Hebrew, with this finger here, the word for accusation is Satan. That's what the word Satan means, the accuser, ha-satan. And so if we are pointing the finger, we are falling afoul of Genesis 12:3, and we are sympathetically in attunement with the enemy of the Jewish people. It says, weep for the Jewish people. It also says in Isaiah 63 that in all their affliction, the Jewish people's affliction, God is afflicted. So if God is afflicted and we're cheering the enemy, that's a bad scenario.
Okay, now moving up to the more recent time, things have really developed in recent weeks with the engagement with Hezbollah in the north. You already alluded to how actually it's Iran who's behind the whole thing, that they actually were the ones that instigated the Hamas attack. And so I don't want to get into all those details. Now we keep hearing about Israel is facing a 7-front war. Many people have been really encouraged by how well the situation in the north has gone. It's quite a contrast to the initial attack last year, where Israel appeared to be taken by surprise, and now there's all this happening. And I remember because I don't know if we talked before. I know you've written that it was really Hezbollah all this time that's been the greater threat, with all their ballistic missiles and all the rest, and yet it hasn't gone down that way. But I want to go specifically to Iran and where they're at and how we're to relate to them. And very specifically, I want to bring you back to Canada for a minute. I'm going to get your response to a clip that I'd like to play for you, and I'll give you the background to it. So I mentioned that we were at a memorial gathering on Parliament Hill on the 6th of October, on Sunday, and then Monday night was the more official Ottawa Remembrance of October 7th. There were 12 to 1,400 people gathered at a large convention hall, and we're in Ottawa. So the Prime Minister spoke, the Ambassador of Israel to Canada spoke, and the leader of the opposition party, Pierre Poilievre. The opposition party is the party in power is the Liberal Party of Canada. The main opposition is the Conservative Party of Canada, led by Pierre Poilievre. And he's been unequivocal from the beginning. We were also at the initial gathering it was the 9th. Yeah, it was the 9th of October last year, large gathering at the Jewish Community Center. Again, the Prime Minister spoke, he spoke. And both times the Prime Minister has said all the right words at those gatherings, but many of us have not been happy with the various other things that he said, or the lack of support his government has given to Israel and the Jewish people in this past year. Anyway, there's something that the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, said at the rally, and then it got followed up with they call it a scrum, where the news people gather around the politicians at Parliament and they ask them questions. So I'm going to play for you a news bit that starts off with something that he said at the memorial on Sunday. And it immediately is followed by him answering some press questions. And then I want to get to your response to it. So hopefully I could bring this up okay.
Israel must be able to prevent Iran from using nuclear weapons. If necessary, that means proactively striking Iranian nuclear sites and oil installations to defund the terrorist regime.
I think the idea of allowing a genocidal, theocratic, unstable dictatorship that is desperate to avoid being overthrown by its own people to develop nuclear weapons is about the most dangerous and irresponsible thing that the world could ever allow. And if Israel were to stop that genocidal, theocratic, unstable government from acquiring nuclear weapons, it would be a gift by the Jewish state to humanity.
So, what do you think of that?
Well, I'm not up on Canadian politics like I used to be, but I really appreciate the courage and the steel in the backbone of this conservative leader. I think he spoke truthfully and biblically, and certainly has a clear understanding of what's going on in the Middle East.
So did he encapsulate it as well as I thought he did?
Yes, he did. Yeah. There's very few people who have such courage these days. This is not the day for courage in politics.
Can you elaborate just a little more with a few more minutes we have left of the seriousness of the Iran threat and Israel's opportunity? And do you think they can? Well, first of all, we don't know if they're going to hit the nuclear reactors. We don't know what they're going to do. Maybe you could share what you think, what they should do, what they can do, what you think what might happen. Go for it.
Well, people always they say a specialist is someone 50 miles away from home. And there's many specialists in the world here. They say that if something is a secret, it means you don't talk about it publicly. So I wouldn't, even if I knew, I wouldn't say, The issue here with Iran is Iran sees things moving toward an apocalyptic confrontation between Shiite Islam and Sunni Islam. That would mean between Tehran and Mecca. And then, but just before that, they see them fighting against the rest of the world, which would be the great Dajjal, America, the great Satan, the little Dajjal, Israel. And so from their perspective, this is
just, by the way, when you say they see, that's their belief system. That's
Yes,
that's not their political prowess at work. That's their belief system.
That's their belief system. And they're moving everything they have politically and as far as nuclear material and everything to achieve that. They see the West as a bunch of apostates who care only about their own personal comfort, whereas they see themselves as leading the charge for the real form of Islam, which they see is in Iran and Qom, and not in Mecca. So that's their goal. In order to do that, they've set up a belt around Israel of 7 different nations to destroy Israel. They're even supporting Sunni Hamas people in Gaza. They're supporting Hezbollah, of course, which would be Shiite in Lebanon, Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, which used to be under American control, the Houthi Shiites in Yemen. And their goal is, and Syrians are, of course, Alawi, which is considered not Shiite, not Sunni, but closer to Shiite. And so their goal is basically to put a belt around Israel's neck and to tighten it. That's what they're doing. That's their goal. They're not interested in peace treaties. They want to see us taken out. And they've been working on this since 1982. So that's 42 years they've been building this coalition. And they're not about to put it down. And that's kind of where we're going. So Ezekiel 38 talks about Persia being one of the forces fighting Israel in the Gog and Magog war. So I don't think Persia's out of the picture in the short term. I think they still have some staying power here. But so do some of the Arab nations in Psalm 83 in that war against Israel. So we're getting closer to that there, but we're not there fully in it right at this point.
All right. I think we can, therefore, sum up all that's been happening this past year is that there really has been this existential threat towards Israel. It's been planned for a long time. Those who have thought that they could just negotiate some sort of get-along situation have had their heads in the sand. And October 7th of last year was the enemy of not only Israel, but of civilization showing its true colors.
Yep, that's where we are. It's a marathon. This is not a sprint. And those who believe in the God of Israel and who trust in his word need to be both looking in his word and praying and asking God how they can pray and what he wants us to pray and be proactive in. It's not an automatic pilot thing. It's a highly sober, wonderful, exciting, and tremulous time in history.
Tremulous?
Yes, it's trembling.
Oh, tremulous. Tremulous.
No, not with a B. Tremulous. U-L-O-U-S.
Wow, you learn something new every day, especially with Avner.
My mother was an English teacher.
Okay, I will defer. Well, this has been helpful as always. We could be talking for another couple of hours. People have asked me through years, where do I go for my information? I will first, I admit, I'm not an expert in the whole Middle East situation. I try to keep abreast as much as possible. I go to people like Avner for help on this and the ongoing situation there. But I find myself, I can only take in so much. This, especially with the anniversary, I can't fully relate to my brothers and sisters in Israel itself and what they've gone through for the past year. But we have found this very heavy. And of course, we've also had all sorts of interactions with people, with leaders, like never before since that horrific day. But I find that I can only watch so much, I can only read so much. And so with that in mind, I want to encourage people to, if you haven't already, sign up for Avner's newsletter. It is one of my go-tos. It's one of the things that I try to read when it arrives. You could sign up for it by going to his website, davidstent.org, davidstent.org. And there's several places there where there's a contact page or whatever. You can see, sign up for my newsletter. And you could see all his past editions of his newsletter there as well. So Avner's really good at analyzing the situation, what's going on, what we're dealing with from a biblical perspective. He's not the only one that does this sort of thing, but I really have appreciated what Avner has to say. So I encourage people to sign up for that. So please do that. Is there anything else you want to add before we go, Avner?
I would say the most important thing to do is to pray. There was a prophet named Elisha, and there was a king, and he came to him and said, "Take these arrows and hit the ground, and you will defeat the Syrians." And so he hit the ground 3 times, and Elisha said, "Why only 3? If you had done 7, you would have totally been decisive about it, and you would have won." So there's an element of our heart revealing itself through our intensity and passion in these things. Just want to encourage people to really press into the Lord's face and heart, to see what's on his heart, not to look as much even to me or others, but to see what's on his heart for this time from him to you, so that you can actually be effective in his hands with these challenges.
Yeah, one of the things that you've challenged me on, I already thought I believed this as I've looked at this particular issue through the years, but you really challenged me, especially on that first reflection we did a year ago. We're called to love. We're called unto justice, kindness, but we have not been called to niceness. We have not been called to some sort of strange sort of fairness. God didn't create the world that way, and right is right and wrong is wrong. And October 7th of last year brought to the fore some issues, especially for Bible believers, that we really need to deal with, and it's godly to take a side when it's taking the side of what is right. That doesn't mean we don't care about other people. We're supposed to pray for our enemies, love our enemies, but at the same time, we need to do what is right. We need to act justly. We need to take a stand. And I thank Avner. I thank you, Avner, for helping me and challenging me on this with this particular issue. And it's helped to fuel my encouragement of others to stand for what is right in these tremulous, is that the word? Tremulous times. Okay.
Years ago, there was a man named Cat Stevens, Greek Orthodox adulterer, who cuckolded all his friends. He felt bad about it, and he became a Shiite Muslim. He had written the song Peace Train. But God is not bringing a peace train in our day. He's bringing a war train. And for us, we have a choice. We can get on the war train, or we can let it pass us by, but the train is coming through.
Yeah, and one of the things I've been saying, and we alluded to it, and this might be a good place to close, and that is, I've been trying to tell people that Israel is on the front lines of a battle, an existential threat that's coming for all of us. That alone should encourage people to support and to pray that in the providence of God, he put the Jewish people on that battle line. And most Israelis don't understand what it's all about. They don't understand the spiritual dimensions. They don't understand the eschatology. It's not that. And you alluded to it too, that and I was listening to I listened to other podcasts, and this man was talking about how impressed he's been, how the young people have risen up at this time. It's been in a day where youth is so much more about social media, TikTok, and video games and all that. The Israeli young people have really stood at this time. And it's not comfortable for us living in North America to even think about these things. But this threat is coming for us. And so we need to pray for strength for the IDF, for Israel, for the Jewish people at this time especially.
Amen.
So again, thank you, Avner. Folks, go to davidstent.org, get Avner's email, pray for him and his family, pray for the Jewish people in Israel. So Avner, thank you so much. So what did you think of that? If you appreciated what Avner had to say, I would encourage you to please share this video or the audio version with others. Please post to social media. Also, don't forget to subscribe. That really, really helps. You can comment on this presentation, or you could contact Avner by going to his website, davidstent.org. You remember to sign up for his newsletter there. There's also a way to contact him directly there. But if you want to contact me, you could do so at comments@thinkingbiblically.org. That's comments@thinkingbiblically.org. And so until next time, this is Alan Gilman with Thinking Biblically.